morning, good afternoon, good evening, as the case may be, to listeners in different parts of the world. So I would like to first welcome our panelists to the discussion. Arvind Morbale from ONGC, Mahesh from McDermott in Kuala Lumpur, and Rakesh Verma from Simon, India. He's also located today in Bombay, I believe, like I am in Bombay. So it's a very, very important question which has been plaguing the minds of EPC contractors as well as project implementers like ONGC or IOCL or BPCL for many, many years. What is the best way to select an EPC contractor? Is L1 the best way? Should you do it in any other manner? From the point of view of the perspective which many of us are faced with in the oil and gas market, that the client profile is essentially national oil companies. Essentially, often, of course, it does. There are also private sector companies like maybe Shell or Exxon or something. But in general, we are faced with a public sector or government-owned company scenario where essentially people are looking for a very, very objective method of a final evaluation and selection. From that point of view, L1 is a very popular and commonly adopted method of selecting EPC contractors, but unfortunately, it doesn't always deliver the goods or is not always a good choice for the customer as well as for the contractor. We have seen quite often that contractors are selected on that basis, especially if they are L1 by far, by way below the other competition. It does point to a possibility that the contractor has underestimated the scope of work or has not, or has underpriced or undercosted the elements of material and services. And therefore, not only does he suffer, but the other contractors who are possibly engaged in executing other packages in a large project, which are interdependent, also suffer, and the customer, of course, suffers from a huge amount of cost overruns and time overruns and everything else. So today's discussion is primarily on what can we do to ensure that if at all L1 is to be the final criteria, what are the steps to be adopted before the price bids are evaluated to ensure that everybody is on the same page? Or if there are going to be suggestions for other, aspects to be evaluated as well, apart from price, what should those be, and what should be the methodology to be used so that the final evaluation is as objective as possible. So, from that point of view, then that is the discussion today. So, I would like to first request Arvind Morbale, our good friend with whom we are executing currently very large projects and also worked very closely in the past, and who has benefited and also suffered from L1's syndrome. So, Arvind sir, would you like to please come in and talk about what has been your experience in selecting contractors on the basis of L1, and if you would like to, if it was possible to have it your way, what would you do? Just a quick.
Thank you, Mr. Ashwini. Thank you, Mitra, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all the personnel joined virtually on this. Welcome to my co-panelists, Mahesh ji and Rakesh. Being in public sector generally, because we handle the public money, obviously there has been a preference to the L1 bids. Now, slightly there has been a change. Certainly there has been a change in the perception because, as you rightly said, the experience has been mixed, wherein we have got benefited. Certainly with L1 there will be, the companies would get benefited, but we have suffered also because of the shortcomings of the contractors. Slowly there has been a change. In even the public sector approach from L1 to a sort of an QC-based methodology, quality cost based thing. That means giving due merit to certain quality parameters. Now, this we have started for the consultancy proposals, or engaging particularly project management consultants, engineering consultants. We have been following the QCBS methodology. We do realize that only L1 criteria does not, it is not beneficial. It's not beneficial because it has an inherent risk. We do appreciate that, and I don't have any reason not to admit that. But there are certain, if we have to move from, say, the L1 to the more sort of an practical approach, more reasonable approach in selecting EPC contractors, certainly we need to possibly change the criteria. L1 would still be there, but who has to be L1 needs to be identified. Meaning, even for, say, for the big project, what for all our offshore projects, we had been giving fairly a sort of an basic engineering document and restricting my talk to the EPCs. And based on that, we had been seeking bids from all our business partners from the world. And we were evaluating technically the bids, and after the technical shortlistings, we were opening it. We were not giving any merit to the experience of the EPC contractor, the safety related track record of the contractor, the resources what they have, the experience what they have. These were not there. So certainly, as Ashwini was putting up, we had a mix of benefits and sufferings. So what is possibly, I feel, is in EPC kind of a thing, two things maybe were coming to our mind, and we did try also that if it is feasible and possible to have the feed competitions. So if we have the feed competitions, it will give flexibility to the contractor. In turn, both will get benefited because the contractor will do a detailed feed and he will give a cost to it, which the company can evaluate because the feed has to meet all the technical requirement was one. Second was a QCBS approach. So the QCBS approach was becoming sort of challenging for us because it was becoming very, very complex. How do we make a QCBS matrix for the EPC job? So we were working, we are still working. It's a work in progress on these two particular aspects. And I'll be more than happy to get suggestions from my co-panelists as well as anyone from the audience that how do we proceed. I also remember a quote which I happened to read. I mean, it says the Taj Mahal would not have been so beautiful had Shah Jahan selected the L1 fellow for this. So with this, I think I will leave the floor to my other panelists. Yeah,
thank you. Thank you, Arvind. I think that was some good insights came out from there. I would like to invite now Rakesh for your comments on what from your perspective as contractor from from a large company, and when you're going into make an offer, what is it that you would like a client to evaluate apart from the price which you're submitted? What are the other things you would like to see evaluated?
Yeah, thank you. And good evening, all. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever people are. See, yes, I will keep the contractor's perspective in front of all of you. And what I feel that as a contractor, my expectation is that we should get a fair chance and fair opportunity to win that project, win that prospect. For that, there has to be right ways, right processes in place, whether you are going on quality cost or you are going on the feed competition. Lowest bid is certainly not the answer. I mean, this is my personal feeling that for simple projects, that may be fine, but the topic of this panel discussion, very important thing is that complex projects. So once we are talking about complex projects, means high capital cost and the nature of the project is very, very complex. So, and also I am a firm believer that capital cost is not the only thing which we should see or client should see. it should be the life cycle cost of the project. That's very important. Once you see life cycle cost, then this L1 criteria becomes very secondary. Then you have to go on the quality of the bid, quality of the bidder, quality of the people who are going to execute your project. These are very, very important things. And I'll give you my experience actually. While I was working with Samsung Heavy Industries, I had done a couple of projects where we had undergone the feed competition. And that was the projects, namely RFPSO and Dana FPSO. So, this is a very, very fair thing if executed rightly. Means the preliminary qualifications were done, 3 people, 3 bidders were selected, and then the fair chance was given. Based on certain premise, the feed has to be developed. One good thing I saw, which Mr. Morbale can appreciate as a owner, that the owner's involvement during that feed at all 3 stations was there to great extent. So that if one party is trying to cut the cost and doing a feed very, very not only optimum but low quality, then they will not allow that. So a team of client and client consultant were involved at all the 3 stations, 3 bidders, when the feed was going on. So a similar quality of feed was generated. However, there are a lot of innovations and cost optimization practices were adopted separately by 3 of them, and then accepted feed will be selected. Say out of 3, 2 accepted feed, because one technically life cycle cost will be impacted. So 2, and in that whoever is lower one, you can select. That is very, very justifiable, that lowest of 2 or 3 good bidders who can complete the project successfully, and the life cycle cost remain within the boundaries, expectations of the owner. So this is what I feel, and I think we later touch on that I also have a view on that what should be the factors we should consider in non-price attributes. So I'll talk about it later. Ashwini?
Yeah. That's a good roundup. Yeah, feed competition basis. Mahesh, I would like you to comment on what are the factors to more or less on the same note which Rakesh ended his opening remarks, because Arvindji also said, ultimately, of course, it has to be the price. That's the remark he made. Ultimately, it must be a price selection. But before that is done, a good amount of screening of contractors has to be done so that everybody quotes on a, let's say, is on the same page, or the assumptions and the basis on which people are bidding are the same, including their understanding of the bid. So, given that, what would be your comment on how a bid should be structured and how it should be evaluated?
Good afternoon, everyone. So, I just wanted to first step back a little bit. We talked about resilience of the industry. I think that is kind of the theme of the conference as well. And if you look at, specifically with the COVID and the impact it has had on the business, obviously, vaccinations are here and everyone is upbeat about it. But if you look at what has happened, there has been in the last 1 year, particularly in the energy industry, there has been a huge cut or reduction in the capex. It is a fact, right? Operators have decided not to then spend money. As the oil prices come back up, gas prices are going up, but the confidence in the industry is not back. Then even for existing projects where, committed capex is around, you have a disrupted supply chain today. It's still a little bit uncertain in terms of when you can get stuff done. And there has been a huge focus on people movement. What we thought, and particularly when you're looking at very large EPC projects where you're going to have, despite the fact that many of these projects could be India-based, we do, for example, the project which, Ashwini, you and your team and our team are executing for Morbale. It is executed across the world. So the impact of moving people has had a huge impact, and the cost to people in terms of following quarantine regulations, getting things. So in this backdrop, you've had the contracting community, the EPC community, the vendor community, as well as the operators are all taking a step backwards. There is a lack of confidence. So, however, we all know, based on the demand model, based on what we are hearing from the various sectors, that at some point in time, maybe late 21, maybe early 22, that the buoyancy will be back in the market. Whether it is driven by governments pumping money into infrastructure projects, or oil and gas projects which are driven by demand in the likes of plastics, etc. So at this point in time, when the industry is back, this may be a good opportunity for us to then step back and see if we can do something different that is good for everyone. And I think, and I actually then go with what Morbale has stated already, and what Rakesh has also stated in terms of seeing that let's not drive price-driven L1 only as a criteria. So to answer your questions, I have a couple of live examples. So I know we generally have this perception that public sector only drive L1. So if you look at, for example, I will pick a good example. So the largest subsea project in the world was actually awarded by Morbale and his team for 98/2, which we're executing. So there they took a slightly different approach, given the technical challenges that were associated with it. They went for a pre-qualification first before they even issued an ITT. So what they did in that pre-qualification is they pulled out a functional spec, or whatever you call it, minimum requirements that would have to be met, right? And what they did also along with it is they went ahead and did a full analysis. They took a good 6-8 months time on that, but in terms of looking at a criteria of what the contractors have done before, similar type of work elsewhere, capacity, financial constraints, all these things were looked at, and the technical competence was also looked at, and ultimately they ended up, say, shortlisting 4 companies or 4 consortiums, 4 groups of people, right, who are able to do this work. And what was interesting about it was, in the end, if you then at that point in time looked at any of those 4 groups, in my view, all of those 4 groups were equally competent to do the work. I think they got the people into that. So I know it is a unique situation wherein that was adopted, but then at that point in time, it really didn't matter as to who was L1 from that point onwards, because from a competency perspective, you've taken care of it. So you've done that by using a pre-qualification criteria or a filtering criteria, whatever it is. So I think that was quite successful from that. So that we see often, and I think that is something that can be adopted. Now, coming back to the question of what do we...
Sorry, Mahesh, sorry to cut in. Would you like to share what were the aspects which were used to evaluate those pre-qualified contractors for the benefit of the listeners? Very quickly, what were the topics which they evaluated?
So, few things. Number one is obviously, it is an EPC contract. It is a large subsea contract. So, it had some specific technological components in the trees and control systems. So, they specified that you should have installed X number of these before and completed them, typical ONGC type of. Then when it came to an engineering capacity, in terms of you should have had so much of engineering related to these done already as an experience. And you should have a capacity. You should have done some of this work in the last 2-3 years, not 20 years ago, and with the capacity available in terms of people. Then the other criteria was, and a very key aspect of it is your fabrication facilities and your installation facilities, which are your offshore assets. That again, they specified that they should be available, they should have done the work. And I think if I remember right, that should also be the primary asset should be owned by the contracting entity, not subcontracted out. They also avoided somebody coming in, sitting at the top and subcontracting everything out. And then last but not least, the financial criteria, your ability to carry forward a large project of that sort, right? We're talking about billions of dollars. I think these were the criteria that were employed. And I think that those were the criteria over which parties were pre-qualified.
Okay.
And then, if I might just going back, just completing, sorry, Ashwini. In terms of factors you said, so we talked about pre-qualification. I think a few other factors we have seen elsewhere that is being used in the industry when you come to say, I call the concept evaluated L1. So you drive somebody to an L1, but they are not L1 on price alone. It's an evaluated L1. What are the other factors? Generally, it tends to be total install cost. I think Rakesh touched upon it a little bit in terms of life cycle cost. So it is your OPEX plus CAPEX. So what is the total impact of it? And then, so that is one aspect of it. Then the second aspect we talked about it is the HSE and the quality aspects. Yes, may not be a major factor, but it is an important factor in terms of ensuring that all of us have a social responsibility as well, so that we are not doing something harmful either for the environment or to the people. So I think that was another factor that was generally tended to be added. And also the ability, one other thing that is usually coming in is, as we said, the feed competition aspect of it. So that is another thing that we've seen usually in terms of your ability to carry out a feed. And if not, and one other thing we might want to add upon is, if you do feed and then if you're evaluated, then there is a compensation mechanism put in front of you, so that the party which wins the EPC gets the EPC, but the other parties at least get compensated for the feed. In which way, in this case, what you do is ensure that the parties who are coming into the feed are absolutely committed towards driving a good solution. So I think there are four factors. So over to you.
Right. So that was, I think, excellent opening remarks from everybody. So we have a pretty good picture of the overall scenario. I would like to, once again, as far as the context of the discussion is concerned, many of us have been spent many years in the upstream oil and gas industry. So our comments and our perspective tends to lean towards upstream oil and gas. I would also like you all to remember that there are also other scenarios. For example, there could be a refinery project coming up, a smaller unit like a CDU, EDU, or an SRU, or which might not have either the luxury of time or whatever different perspective to go in for a field competition and everything else like that. So from looking at it from different perspective, I would like you to think about, and let's have an open discussion about the quality of the feed document which is issued by a customer, and how important is that factor in ultimately picking a contractor on the basis of L1. How important is the quality of feed? Let's have a discussion on that one. So, Morbale, would you like to open on that subject? Then other people can come in as you like.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ashwini, and thank you, Mahesh ji and Rakesh also for putting the perspective right. There is no doubt because until and unless he knows what he wants very clearly, he will not get it what he wants. So I think all said and done, the feed document has to be a perfect document, no doubt about it. And it has been our experience the way initially, most of our we were mostly into the basic engineering. We are not doing much of the feed. Over the years, by doing so much of basic engineering, that itself has got converted to some sort of a good amount of a feed document. And so I'm sorry for this. So there is no doubt that there has to be a very good feed document from the client, from the owner, no doubt about it. Or in wherever, as Ashwini was pointing out, if the projects are simple, not complex, well, the client itself can do a feed and give the feed document, so that there are uncertainties are reduced, ambiguities are reduced. Second, what Mahesh ji touched the point upon was, in fact, we also tried that for complex projects, it is always better to have a feed competition. So because that, and paid feed competition, because then the participants are motivated to give their best solution, because they know that more better feed, then they will price accordingly. And then we can have methodologies for costing, but we'll restrict now because your question was only on the feed document. I give a chance to our other panelists also to put in their view.
Yeah, feed document, I meant essentially a document which is produced for the client on which basis all contractors bid. So that is the document I'm talking about. A feed carried out by the customer. Rakesh, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. See, the contractor knows the pain the best of the feed quality, but I will go one step further, actually, that feed is done in details, and a good company has been used, or a group team, very good team has been used to carry out the feed. and a good feed is generated, detailed feed is generated, where things are not ambiguous, they are quite clear, and then bidders are bidding. Now, whoever has done it, there are always scope for improvements, there are always scope for innovation and the optimization. My personal view is, which used to happen when a little while earlier, when I was doing the projects, it is not recent, that there was a feed review period after award, and based on detailed feed, the people have submitted their bids, and the lowest bid has won of the acceptable technical bidders, technically as accepted bidders, and then the award has been done. Right now, after that, there should be the work should continue. The schedule should not be extended because of this feed review period, but there has to be a window, say 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever window, where there are some places where contractor feels. Otherwise, what happens? The owner says that contractor is responsible for each and everything. Feed is done by me, but guarantee has to be taken by contractor. Right. So that is the pain contractor is having now. So I suggest that we come back to that practice of feed review window. So the in between, in during that window, if contractor comes out with something, then he can point out, and owner can accept that as a price variation or time variation. That chance should be given to, and that will be for optimization, for capital cost of the project, for reducing capital cost of the project, or the life cycle cost. So if it is in that direction, then there should be a chance given to EPC contractor. I mean, in the feed document, I want to say this.
Okay.
Mahesh.
Okay.
Mahesh,
Yeah, I think so.
What is your remarks?
I would add a couple of things there, Ashwini. I think going back to your original question, let's not focus on upstream. So if I look at some of the simplistic onshore jobs that are out in the market, right, in terms of, you talked about CDU, EDUs and SRUs, etc. So I would like to differentiate between, maybe it's a $50 million from a capex perspective and above $100 million. So where you have a smaller capex, I think the answer is to bring in the contractor community in. I think the customer getting into a level of detail where it becomes purely the risk to the contractor is what they do on site in terms of the actual work. I think it makes a lot of sense, because you are then looking at a larger contracting community, and also you're looking at the prospect of how much risk even a bigger contractor will take for a $50 million or a $100 million job. So in those cases where I think where your capex is limited, or exactly what you're doing, particularly in brownfield type environment, the customer or the owners should be able to then take the definition to a level where there is absolutely no ambiguity, and then you let out the packages purely on the basis of the quantities and the engineering done. If you go to the other side in terms of where you start looking at a slightly larger size, right, whether it is upstream or downstream, then you're starting to bring in the larger players and to bring in some of these things that Rakesh talked about, the innovative aspects of it, driving down the costs, etc. I think the concept of feed competition is important. So, in the 25 years, I've seen the best feeds that has been done by an engineering contractor. Every EPC contractor will find fault with it. It is a fact, because the feed contractors are driven purely from the perspective of spending less man hours to get out an X number of deliverables. They are not incentivized to come out with the clearest documents. Their incentive is to, within a period of time, come out with a set of documents that tick the box for the least amount of man hours. When you come to an EPC perspective, feed or engineering effort is only 5 to 6% of your overall cost. So here, where we think is we want more definition. So there is always a difference between the two. And typically what happens is the owners sit in between in the gap. The owners try to pass that risk across to contractors, Rakesh says, by saying that you have to assume the feed. But what they are buying is actually then the contractor will add that risk back into the price. So they are paying for it one way or another. So I think the concept of going back into a feed competition, right? When you're going above a certain level of capex, bring in 2 or 3 contractors, feed competition. What happens is, number one, you are then eliminating that risk, and you are incentivizing the EPC contractor to drive a solution that will drive innovation. And particularly in these times, when you are talking about digital analytics, you are talking about reducing carbon footprint, all these things are needed to be incorporated into your design right from day one. And you can only achieve it by bringing the EPC contractor right into the mix on day one. And history tells you, if you go back and look at it, that where you have gone for feed competition with a 1 party or 2 parties or whatever, where I mean by is end-to-end solution by one set of contractors, the overall length or schedule of the project and the total install cost is lower than a case where you've done feed separately and gone to ITT. It's just that there is a perception sometimes in the owner's side that by doing feed, you are able to attract more EPC players, etc. But in the larger scheme of things, history statistics prove that it is not the case.
Right.
Thank you.
I think that's in generally around the table, it does appear that the competition appears to be coming out very, very clearly as a preferred method of contracting, particularly for complex jobs. But before we move to a more detailed discussion on that subject, which is very, very vital, I would like to ask Mr. Morbale one question in order to just complete and round off the discussion we have been having earlier on, let us say, smaller projects without so much complexity. Typically, Arvind, we have seen that on certain contracts, there is a contractor, a bidder who has bid extremely low. And everybody knows that it is impossible to do it at that price. And the contractor then accepts the contract for whatever reason. There are, I don't want to name any contractors or any project right now, but very often contractors bid not for the sole purpose of executing the project. They have other motives in mind to build an order book and things like that for various reasons. So if you were to have a set of bids where some of them are absurdly low, what can we do to weed out those? Can we look at something by which an L1 which is X% below your own budget can be disqualified? Do you have any comment on that? How to remove unworkable bids?
Yeah. Unfortunately, right now, we don't have such a provision in the tendering systems. And that was the suffering part of it, what you have mentioned. But I do agree that we certainly need to have benchmarking, because internally we need to benchmark, as you said, for those smaller projects, a good feed and a benchmark cost. So that cost becomes a benchmark cost for us. And even for what I feel is, even for the smaller projects, like if we have, even if it is not a feed competition sort of a thing, we should have a pre-qualification criteria, what Mahesh was mentioning, because then in that pre-qualification, at least except for the HSC and the experience part of it, most of the parameters are aligned, and there is possibly a less tendency of getting a very very aggressive is one. And in addition to that, I also believe, and I agree with your suggestion, that we need to have cost so that we don't land up into situations.
Actually, public sector companies do have their own internal budget. On the basis of it, approval is taken. But if you have a contractor who quotes absurdly below that budget, somehow the prerogative to disqualify him is not taken by many client companies. Even though it is more or less common knowledge, it cannot be done at that price. It's not possible.
You're right, because see, the public sector system, unfortunately or unfortunately, is driven all by what is written in the books. So that particular provision is not written. If it is written, certainly. So the suggestion
can be introduced to say less than 6%. It's already below, then it cannot be qualified.
Exactly. It should be a part of our tender accepting or tender finalization procedure. That yes, and it should be made possibly known to the bidders also that the company has benchmarked its cost, and bids extremely below that benchmark will not be considered.
Now, since the general consensus is, let's spend a little bit more time together on a feed competition firstly, and secondly on pre-qualification of contractors, which was a highly successful model which was followed in 98/2. So if you have multiple parameters on the basis of which a pre-qualification is carried out, anybody has experience or views about what should be the weightages for the different aspects on which a pre-qualification is carried out.
Can I take up this, Ashwini? Before coming to weightages, I was reading that what Mahesh has explained very nicely, what should be the criteria for the qualification for bidder, EPC bidder. I want to add on that certain very, very significant issues in current perspective, actually. Okay? Technical, relevant experience and track record and all the capabilities and capacities, financial, yes, sure. One thing I want to say, QHSE management systems, which Mahesh touched, but what I want to say that it is very, very important. It can be most important also many a times, because even one accident,
yes,
a few accidents can take a toll on the project.
Oh, yes,
completion, as well as on the cost, as well as on the reputation. So QHSE management, a good QHSE management should be in place in successful bidder or qualified bidders. This is one. I have few more things there that keeping this COVID-19 situation in view, anything can happen. And we should be prepared whether an organization, for the complex project I'm telling, whether an organization is having some business continuity management plan in place, whether they have done enterprise risk management, so that any such situation they will be able to handle nicely, and the project execution will not suffer to that extent which it should have if they don't have these things in place. So this is what I wanted to add. That
you mean a black swan event handling capability from before? Is that what you meant? In case there is
this is in place. Business continuity management is in place. ISO 22301 is I think the standard for that. And this is very much in place, I'm practicing that actually myself as individually. For the risk management, ISO 31000. So these two are coming. These are upcoming. They are there from 2018, I think. But I think this should become because now COVID-19, COVID-20, COVID-30, or whatever may come, you never know. From where what comes, and it disrupts our life, disrupts our businesses. So many business houses have collapsed. People are hungry. People are not having jobs. So I think each organization should go into preparation for that. And that should be, these should be whatever I told, QHSE management, BCM and risk and all. I think this should be, there should be a criteria that this successful bidder should have those things in place. And they are seriously pursuing those. So I will not speak on weightages. I think Mahesh will be better person to speak on weightages.
Can you give some insight into, in your experience in different environments, what are the type of weightages which people use for different aspects?
You mute, Mahesh.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for reminding me on that. So in terms of, weightages, not essentially, there are some variations to it, right? If you look at, so we talked about smaller projects where, for example, where we said that the customer has defining most of it and letting out contracts. So in these cases, what happens is you do not have enough time to do all this pre-qualification, going through all of that, because it is the size of the capex is low. So what happens is, if you've seen the likes of, say, the Petrobrases of the world, or even some of your Australian customers and a couple of Asian customers, what they do is they do what we talked about, a pre-qualification of all the bidders, right? During that point in time, your emergency response or enterprise risk management, your quality, your ability to do all of these things are assessed, and then you are shortlisted. And then sometimes, Ashwini, we talked about it. The Aramco has a similar model of shortlisting people and then bringing them into a panel. Some people go one step further, and in fact, actually, they go to the point of then having draft unit rates already done and MSAs in place, which is what I mean by MSAs is, service agreements in place. Then what happens is that particular scope of work, when it is, say, the $50 million scope of work, it is put out to these MSA bidders and then ask them for a final pricing. So you know that they have to be working within the bounds of that. So the question you asked previously about them failing and going below a certain value is taken care of. At the same time, within that value, you are able to drive a level of competition. That is one in terms of smaller projects. Looking at bigger projects, we talked about weightages and weight factors. So typically what happens is when we go to this evaluated L1 type arrangement, QHSE, yes, everyone wants to talk about it, but I have to say that despite all that, when it comes to converting it into an actual weight factor, I have not seen anything more than 10%. There is a lot of focus on it. So, but there is at best, you are talking about a weight factor of 10%. And I think the other things generally tend to be your ability to bring resources, the quality of the resources you have, the strength of the organization, and how much work you have done elsewhere, plus what work you have. And from a customer's perspective, what could be the risk to his work because of your other work? So these are things they always use. And that probably is about another 15-20%. So if you take a jurisdiction like Australia, right, if you go back to say 2011, 2012, when they were going through that big boom in Australia, price was probably at 50% or less than that. But unfortunately, as we progress towards today, and I think price has now taken over to about 80-85%.
Right.
So that is generally the perception. But we also do believe that as the market picks up, like everyone is saying, if we get into 22, then it will be less driven by price, but more driven again by other factors. So certainty, and delivery certainty, as well as, value addition are two factors that they are giving more importance. And last but not least, one thing that we have started seeing, definitely with, say, the likes of Woodside, Shell, etc., is two things I touched upon earlier. One is digital facilities and what you are able to digitize right from the beginning. From day go, what all are you able to digitize? So that is a major factor. That is actually a criteria that they use. So you've got to get digital about it. And the second one is the whole energy transition piece is about your carbon footprint, how much carbon footprint you're able to reduce. So now people are asking you to design facilities wherein you also at the feed stage put a criteria saying that I will be able to reduce my carbon emissions by this value. So this is, again, I know it is a first world concept, but it is a matter of time before it comes to India. I'm talking about in the next 3 or 5 years. So it is an emerging factor.
Yes, that's a very interesting concept. Arvindji, you mentioned in your opening remarks, you mentioned about the QCBS matrix approach. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that? Because my understanding is also poor. You're muted. Arvind, you're muted.
Yeah. Thanks, Ashwini. Sorry for that. Because the QCBS approach, typically what we followed for the consultancy contracts, you'll be surprised, it was a 70-30 approach. I think 70% towards the capabilities, experience of a particular consultant, his assets, experience, and 30% were towards the financial. And then it was as you said, it is an actual price. So Mahesh used the right word, evaluated L1. It was that. But in cases, I believe for one of our another consultancy projects, we had pre-qualification of the bidders done. And then therefore there was an understanding that we should not have this 70-30 because once you have qualified, all the bidders, they're equal. So price should get preference. So we reversed it. 30% towards the technical when actually evaluating the bids, and 70% was given towards the price related thing. Now this can vary depending on the complexity, and of course because one formula will not fit for all the projects, but as we can categorize, smaller size project, one particular formula, complex projects, a different formula. And then I would also like to go with what Mr. Mahesh gave, because the smaller projects we can really have this feed done by the client and then going for the L1 or have a PQC. But for complex projects, certainly it has to be a feed competition, and that too with an integrated. By integrated, I mean there should not be a feed contractor separate and an EPC contractor separate. It should be the EPC contractor himself should do the feed, hire somebody or whatever it is, but it should be that, because that reduces all those points what Rakesh mentioned, it gives opportunity for improvement, optimization, all these opportunities then that particular that entity has, and it benefits both. It benefits the bidders as well as it benefits the organization, the client.
Very typically for feed, when we go down the feed competition route, which seems to be for large complex projects to really the thing to go for, is there a typical kind of steps for what where I am a little bit unclear about is how do you invite people to join the field competition, or is there a pre-qualification for that itself, and how does that work?
Correct.
Step evaluation of how a competition process goes through.
So maybe I can add, and I'm sure Rakesh will have more to add to that. Typically, what it involves is a pre-qualification. And the pre-qualification is not on your feed capability alone. It is a capability of your feed plus your ability to execute the overall project. So you are evaluated whether you are able to do feed, followed by your EPC, EPCI, whatever you want to call it. So that capability. And the other thing that is also done is because you are handing over everything to one contractor or one consortium, the whole concept of, the operability, the, uptime of the facilities, all those things, and how much work you've done on certain stuff like that from an operator's perspective, that is also taken into consideration. So you evaluate, you give it, ultimately only a feed contract is provided, which is basically man hours. But then when you are evaluated for your ability to carry out the EPC project itself. Over to you, Rakesh.
Yeah. Mahesh, you're absolutely right on it. I will put it in this way that this is a qualification for EPC contractor. All the criteria which we have talked so far, and many more can be added, for the improvement of the bidding process, plus the capability of doing feed. Because all EPC contractors may not be having feed, carrying out the feed, So either they should have that capability of carrying out the feed, or they should have a partner in a MOU or agreement, exclusive agreement and all that, so that the feed can be carried out by that team. So this is EPC, detailed EPC criteria plus feed. So this should be the thing. This is how I feel.
Another very important point, Rakesh, you made was as far as the price evaluation is concerned. Okay, ultimately it's L1 is the price to be, but the price is not only the capital investment cost; it's the lifetime cost. You made that point. So I just wanted to check with Arvindji about how do you think? From an owner's perspective, because we are all the other three panelists, we are on a contractor's perspective. But from an owner's perspective, how would you look at evaluating on the capital cost plus lifetime cost? What would you? That seems to be a very, very important point. How to evaluate that?
I certainly see a challenge in, because it's not an easy thing, because the life cycle cost, because determination of the life of a particular asset or a particular equipment itself would be a challenge. So we will have to look into it, because honestly speaking, we have not evaluated on a life cycle cost method, even though while the approvals, when the project particular schemes are being taken up for development, the entire life cycle cost and the rate of return or the margins are calculated. But on the EPC contracts, we have not been evaluating the life cycle cost, because this could be a challenge. That's one. There could be a lot of uncertainties, because once we have to evaluate the life cycle cost, we'll have to assume a lot of things.
I thought it is more relevant from the point of view of a feed competition, where from somebody who carries out a very fundamental design and pre-feed and concept and feed and everything else. Then the quality of feed what somebody is doing could vary quite a bit depending upon so much capital cost and so much running cost. And A plus I might imagine that the capital cost may be low, but running cost could be high, and vice versa. So that may be important in a feed competition. But having made that remark, there is one more type of contract which you evaluated or you were ready to evaluate, which is like an asset which is owned and you have a lease tender. Somebody like an FPSO, somebody quotes to you. How do you evaluate that from the point of view which is whoever is the highest or the lowest bidder in that scenario? How do you evaluate?
Particularly on the FPSO, it's basically once we talk of rental, yeah. I think really the criteria what we have is the day rate, because therein the activities or the job which the particular contractor has to do is specified clearly. And yes. What company, the inputs from the company are also specified. So what we do is that day rate is evaluated over a period of the contract period. That's all. We don't evaluate it wherein also the life cycle cost, because the life cycle cost, it's considered part of the day rate what typically the EPC contractor will be giving it to us.
How does the efficiency of the unit which is brought to the site and given to you, how would that impact the benefit to the company, and how is that evaluated? Is any thoughts?
Someone mentioned about the uptime. So
yes, correct.
So maybe 100% is challenge. So the day rate is specified for 99.5% uptime, and there is an incentive. If it is 95%, the day rate is reduced. It gets 100% day rate only. So there is a formula for this particular adjusting the day rate depending upon the availability. The uptime what a particular asset gives. So that's how that is regulated.
And if I may add to that, Ashwini, we talked about FPSO, now the model is, we are working again for a large petrochemicals facility with the front end of it, because another thing, the whole lease aspect of it is also now adopted in the onshore business. For example, all your offsites and utilities, your air, water, electricity, rather than building facilities in these remote sites, I think we're now going into that lease model whereby you bring in the people who will be able to set up an oxygen and an air separation unit or your electricity unit. And then again, a very similar concept like you had for the FPSO, uptime and the price per unit that they are able to supply. So you specify this is my requirement in terms of air, minimum, maximum, and an average over a period of time. And this is my uptime. And then they decide that they will put up a plant and this is your footprint into which you can do that. Then they decide to put up a plant and give you a rate per unit of air or per unit of electricity and an uptime. Very similar to the concept that Morbale just talked about for FPSO. So that's also now prevalent, or it is definitely gaining in the onshore business as well.
Right. While we are more or less moving towards the end of our discussion, a couple of points on contracting philosophies, which I thought I would open for a discussion. Some time ago, there was a discussion on the alliancing model of contracting, where 3-4 fundamental players are coming together and trying to work out an alliancing model. That may be from a different concept where people come together from before. But even if you do have, a contracting situation, is it possible that there can be an alliancing model where the contractor and the client are incentivized to work together to set up something where the client gets the project on time, and whatever he does, that indeed does happen. The contractor, to a certain manner, gets compensated for his acceleration methods, because then the client, the overall project sees a benefit. Is there anything like that which comes to your mind or in your experience? Just open question.
I think risk-reward contracting you're talking about, I guess. So from that perspective, like it's a touchy subject, right? Because if I'm looking at, for example, the national oil companies, it is going to be a tough one, because it's because, as Morbale said, they are talking about public money and they are answerable to the people, and the ability to put a risk reward contracting, I think, is limited. But I think it is very prevalent in the private sector, in terms of where you have a private party who wants to monetize an asset very fast, or who doesn't have the financial clout to exploit the assets. So they are inviting people, the alliance. So we've had that. I'm sure you've seen that in India itself, where there are people who have had a data room full of, they have data on a subsurface. And then they say, whoever wants to come and join with me, join. And then we'll explore it. You spend the capex, and whatever money we find, we will then share it in this particular model. And if there is a risk and there is a downside, we'll share it in the same model. So that is there. The only aspect to it is in this environment where people are struggling to, hold cash and, collect cash, how many people are incentivized to go and take a risk of this sort? This may be back in fashion in 2 years from now. Today, I don't know how many people will actually sign up to something like it, either from an operator side or from a contractor side. That's my view.
Just a perspective that the remarks also made by Petroleum Secretary a few days ago, to say that in the Indian environment, the encouragement of private players to come in and open up bidding and E&P so that our import bill or importing, I think today is 85% of our energy need is imported. And there's going to be opening up of the sector, at least that was the statements made in the press by the government officials. So the chances are there could be a good number of, private players, and their participation could become more and more. What will happen? There could be more Cairns, there could be more Rosenefs, there could be more Reliances coming into the market. So I'm just, if you are looking at a shift from the contracting customer pool to more and more private sector, don't you think that there could be certain models which will emerge, which is different from just L1? So from that point of view, I wanted to open the discussion. Rakesh, what do you think?
Yeah. See, sharing the cost of the project, capital cost of the project, or teaming for building the project and executing it and owning it is a very, very good way to reduce the life cycle cost, again, I am telling you, and longevity of the project. Because when a EPC contractor builds a project, builds a plant for an owner, he is building for somebody else.
Yes.
Once there is a teaming, then he is building it for himself. And there is a difference in this. So that difference will bring down the life cycle cost and improves the plant quality or longevity and all those things. I think this is a very good model in this, because the participation is going to be by the bidder, by the partner. Then that lowest bid concept will go. That will not work no more. We have to find out some other way, some other way to for the marriage, this kind of marriage, that how they will be married. The criteria for that marriage has to be changed. This is how I feel about it.
So on that happy note, I think we have Mitra back with us, and I think she is reminding us that we should more or less now wind up our discussion or bring it to a
No, there are some questions, sir.
There are a few questions. There are questions.
Yes.
Let us see.
Yes, so we have a very interesting question from Rupesh Anand, Senior Manager, Aarti Industries. He has asked the panel, we always see the similar tasks being executed by the contractors, which are used as a criteria for their evaluation. But when a project is first of its kind, how does one evaluate or gauge a contractor? Anyone can answer. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had this in my notings here, actually. I did not, want to extend the discussion. I wanted to suggest Morbale Sahib and other clients, on this aspect, actually. This is a very relevant question from a contractor. See, customer always wants the best for his project. That I should get best contractor, I should get best people to do it, I should get best facilities to fabricate my project, and now everything best is required. So the best criteria is chosen by client. Now, the best thing is that if we are creating more players in the market, means if you are, there is a difference between same work and similar work. So mostly client keep the same relevant experience. If a process platform has to be built, the same process platform should be there. Water injection, the water injection, oil, gas, like that. But what I am trying to say here, rather than same experience, same relevant experience, kindly keep similar experience. Means till the project is not of very high technical nature, like Mahesh told subsea. If it is not that, then similar experience of executing a complex project should be accepted, so that you are broadening the horizon and you are increasing the number of players in the market, and ultimately the competition is going to be good, and price is going to come down, quality is going to go up. So I agree with Rupesh, that his thinking is right, I think, and this is my suggestion to the owners. Thank you.
So we have another question, and that is directed to Mr. Mahesh Swaminathan. For BOO contract, who owns the land of BOO plant, say a GU air power plant? If it is an owner's premise, then there could be a complication in execution for the BOO contractor. Can you elaborate a little? This is a question from Mr. Divyendu Chakrabarti, Manager Projects, Worli.
So from I think he's talking about a build on operate type concept, right? Build on operate type concept. So I would again talk in relevance to say a build on operate facility in a large petrochemical facility. I mean, I will talk with an example that I have actually seen through. So the owner is looking at developing the petrochemical facility, and then the utilities, I talked about it, air, water, electricity, etc., are then offsites, which are on the other side. So they are given out in a build on operate facility. So effectively what they do is that particular contractor sets it up and sells it to you in terms of units. The land acquisition and the handover of the land is provided to the BOO by the actual owner, the overall owner, on a lease basis. So the lease cost could be very limited, but the title to the land, end of the day, is with the owner, who then says, I am giving it to you. When they bid out the BOO contract, I'm saying, I will give you graded land for 25 years for you to put up your facility. That is generally the concept. If you have a concept wherein the BOO contractor has a facility and then he brings his own land, I think that complication is a little bit more in terms of interface. Usually we've seen that to make things simple, the owner then acquires the land and then subleases it for a period of time for the BOO contractor to utilize.
I don't see any more questions over here. And I think we are very much on time.
Yes.
So on behalf of our team, I would like to thank Mr. Ashwini Kumar, Morbale sir, Verma sir, Mr. Swaminathan. And we do hope that you also look at the digital exhibition that is going on. And thank you once again. Just one small announcement for all our panelists and the guests who are attending. At present, I see 396 delegates attending this session.
Okay.
Great.
So we have very interesting sessions lined up tomorrow also. Mr. P.D. Samudra will welcome the industry. Then we have a presentation on green hydrogen by Mr. Amrit Singh Deo. Technical presentations are there by the industry, and a very, very interesting talk by Mr. Ranjit Kumar, former Solicitor General and Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India. So we do hope that all of you can join us, and this will be followed by a panel discussion, smart solutions for resolving conflict on time schedules for EPC projects. So thank you once again, and we do hope to see you tomorrow. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.